Chapter 11. This way, Hera said. She led Mud out of the village and across a flat area where the dwarves slept in makeshift tents. A few of the dwarf women were already up, lighting fires to prepare scant morning meal with whatever they had salvaged from the burned homes. Looks like Drakecutter is following the direct path the dragon took away from here, Hera said. She sprinted away from Mud. He tried to follow, but the extra pressure of running hurt his tender feet. He winced and dropped back to a walk. "Oh, you poor boy," one of the dwarf women said, patting him on the back. "I'm all right, really," Mud said. He smiled at her and tried to move on, but others pressed around him, babbling. "Such courage, and so young! Are you a knight?" "Thank you, no," Mud said, pushing past them. Flushing with embarrassment, he hurried away. When he caught up to Hera at the edge of the field, she reached her arm out to stop him. "What?" Mud asked. He moved back and stared at the ground Hera indicated. The newly plowed soil was a churned-up mess. Deep claw marks gouged the ground. Hera knelt and touched the dirt with her finger, then got up and retraced her steps. She shook her head. "It's hard to tell. The dwarves have been running all over this field since the dragon left." "Tell what?" Mud asked. "Even I can see the dragon landed here." Hera rolled her eyes. "The dragon never went into Drakecutter's home. That means she must have sent some smaller creature in to get the axe, then picked it up here before she left. Evil dragons aren't the only beings that serve the Dark Queen." Mud stared harder at the messy ground. "Like in Potter's Mill? Do you think the dragon's got a draconian with her?" Hera frowned. "I said whoever took Sonara was carrying a pair of draconic swords, but there were no draconian tracks in Potter's Mill." Hera shook her head. "I don't see any draconian tracks here either." "How would you know what draconian tracks look like?" Mud asked. "I drew one in the dirt for me before I left." Hera pointed to a few places on the ground. "I can tell your footprints, mine, Drakecutter's, and several other dwarfs, but I don't see anything that looks like a draconian track." She put her hands on her hips and glared at the dirt. Dawn's pale light illuminated the horizon. Mud shivered in the chilly morning air. "All right, it wasn't a draconian. What was it?" "Look at this," Hera said, going back to the place next to the dragon prints that she had touched. Mud knelt and stared at the ground where she pointed. Gradually he made out the shape of a foot, barely visible on the ground. "Whoever made it must not weigh very much. You sure that was your own footprint?" he asked. Hera rolled her eyes and stepped next to another print. Her foot left behind a much narrower mark, a couple of inches smaller than the print Hera studied. "Wow, you have little feet," Mud said, grinning at her. "Maybe it was a young dwarf." Hera frowned, her forehead puckered in concentration. "No, dwarf feet are broader, even the young ones. Mud, this is a human footprint, made by someone your age, a boy probably, taller than you, but not much heavier." "I'm getting bigger." Mud straightened and adjusted his pack. "I suppose you're right about the footprint, though. We'd better hurry and find Drakecutter before the dragon or her human helper finds him first." Hera hesitated. "I've been thinking about something you said had told us about the Draconians. Remember, you said that a civic draconian can take the form of someone it's killed. If it killed a human, it could move about in disguise." Mud grimaced. "That makes sense. It would be pretty easy to spot and kill otherwise." A sliver of worry niggled its way into him. With Hera ready to trust everyone they ran into, Mud didn't like the odds of getting a knife in the bag, like I had described. If the dragon's ally were a draconian, and found Drakecutter and killed him before Mud and Hera got to him, they would never know the difference until it was too late. Mud vowed to keep a close eye on the dwarf when they found him. Mud and Hera left the field and followed the young Drakecutter's tracks up to the Vanguard Mountains. They pressed forward until around noon, when the trail led straight up a steep slope to a raw rock. Mud slumped to the ground and fished in his pack for something to eat. Hera shook her head in frustration. What was he thinking? Wasn't he watching where he was going? Of course, a dwarf can't fly straight up the side of a mountain like a dragon can. "It was dark," Mud said. He bit into a soft loaf of bread provided by the dwarfs. "He probably didn't see this until he got here." "Don't talk with your mouth full, Mud. That's disgusting," Hera chided. Mud grinned at her and stuck out his bread-covered tongue. She turned her back on him and studied the ground for a while. "He went this way, skirting the cliff face. Come on, let's go. I want to catch him before nightfall." Mud grimaced and got to his feet. "Don't you know it's bad luck to go adventuring on an empty stomach? "You've just made that up," Hera said. She followed Drakecutter's trail to a break in the cliff, where a landslide provided a path further up the mountain. Up they went, and up again, to where the mountain leveled off on a desolate rocky shoulder. Drakecutter's footprints were hard to make out against the gritty rocks, and Hera had to crisscross back and forth to find the way. Daylight had started to dim when they came to another dead end at the top of a sheer cliff. Looking down, one step off the edge and a person would fall hundreds of feet. Mud squinted into the crimson sunset. A brown lump lay unmoving on the ground at the base of the cliff. Hera gasped and put her hand to her mouth. "Oh no, Mud. Do you think that's him? He would have reached this cliff during daylight. He couldn't have fallen." Mud knelt and leaned over the edge. "Drakecutter!" he yelled. His voice echoed between the mountain peaks. The lump of cloth and leather below didn't respond. "Drakecutter!" Hera screamed. "Drakecutter!" "Oh, hello." A gruff voice spoke from behind him. "It's you, is it? Did you decide to skip Palanthas and just hunt the dragon yourself?" Hera whirled around and Mud jumped to his feet. The burly young dwarf stood there, stretching his thick muscles all over his head. "Sorry, I didn't see you come up. I decided to take a little rest and fell asleep for a bit." "Oh, Drakecutter!" Hera cried. She hugged him and he flushed crimson. "We thought you were dead. There's something down there." She pointed over the side of the cliff. Drakecutter shook his head ruefully. "It's my pack. I was looking over the edge and it dropped it." Mud took a deep breath and stepped away from the cliff, his hand straight to his sword hilt. In truth, the dwarf no longer had a pack, but it could just as easily be a convenient lie. The real Drakecutter could be dead at the bottom of the cliff, and a savage draconian standing before them. Mud wished he knew enough about the dwarf to ask a question that only the real Drakecutter could answer. "Don't worry," Hera said. "Mud has plenty of food in his pack, and even if he eats it all day, I can always hunt us something to eat later. But we're not going after the Red Dragon. We come to convince you to go to Palanthas with us to find out more about the Silver Dragon Pendant." "I thought he didn't want me along," Drakecutter said, stabbing a thick finger at Mud. Mud hadn't, and now he really didn't. But it was too late to back out. "It's all right," Hera said. "Mud, talk to your father. You're coming with us." "You talked to my father? He's awake?" Drakecutter stepped toward Mud. "He regained consciousness briefly," Mud explained. "He wants you to go to Palanthas and ask the knights to fight the dragon. I didn't have the chance to tell him about the pendant, but he didn't know where the stone door was, so we're going to the Great Library like you suggested." Drakecutter groaned and kicked at the ground. "My father will never let me become the great warrior I was meant to be. I can kill the dragon, I know I can." "But not without the axe," Hera said, grabbing hold of Drakecutter's hand. "Help us find the pendant. You can ask the Silver Dragon to get the axe back. Then you can kill the Red Dragon." Drakecutter hesitated, then nodded. "All right, I'll come with you." Mud flinched. His sister might be holding a draconian's hand, or not. It could really be Drakecutter. "This is a lousy place to camp," he said. "We'll freeze to death up here after nightfall. Let's find a way down before it gets too dark." He let Hera and Drakecutter go in front and kept his hand on his sword. If Drakecutter did anything funny, he'd strike first. End of chapter 11.